We all know Adolf Hitler's most famous lies convinced millions to carry out countless atrocities, but did he really lie about being a war hero? Post-World War I history is complicated, but in a nutshell, the Treaty of Versailles imposed steep penalties on the losing countries, including Germany, and that's what Hitler seized upon. He made promises that he only wanted to do two things: restore Germany to its pre-war glory and regain German lands that rightfully belonged to the German people. For a long time, other countries were happy to take him at his word. In fact, his lies had been so convincing that Europe's foremost powers had signed the Munich Agreement in September 1938. This gave Hitler's Germany a portion of Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, which was home to about 3 million ethnic Germans. Great Britain, Italy, and France signed with Hitler's promise that he wasn't going to go any further, but of course he did. Tim Bouverie, author of Appeasement, Chamberlain, Hitler, Churchill, and the Road to War, explained to Time, both of these claims are proven as lies when he invades Czechoslovakia in March 1939, and the British government realizes that he is intent upon wider European conquest, possibly domination. Interestingly, even as Britain called out Hitler for violating the agreement and marching into Czechoslovakia, France still urged caution and appeasement instead of war. Britain, however, was starting to make its position clear. Appeasement had not worked, and Hitler could not be trusted. In 1923, Adolf Hitler, his life, and his speeches was hot off the press. Supposedly written by a conservative German aristocrat and war hero named Victor von Körber, the biography unabashedly painted its subject as Germany's savior. Did this strike people as suspicious? Absolutely not. It wasn't until 2016 that Thomas Weber, a historian from the University of Aberdeen, discovered that instead of being a glowing recommendation from an upstanding German elite, it was written by Hitler himself. Hitler's lie about the authorship of the book turned into a crucial bit of propaganda that essentially allowed him to tell another lie by implication, that he had the support of Germany's conservative establishment, when he definitely did not. The book wasn't subtle either. It compared Hitler's move into politics to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The author even suggests the book should be read as the new Bible of today. It wasn't until Weber got a look at von Körber's private papers that he found documents indicating that he'd just been a front to lend weight to the idea that Hitler was Germany's savior in the making. Weber told the BBC that writing the book as a biography and not an autobiography was impressively deliberate, saying, "To find that it was actually written by Hitler himself demonstrates that he was a conniving political operator with a masterful understanding of political processes and narratives long before he drafted what is regarded as his first autobiography, Mein Kampf." Adolf Hitler famously painted himself as a World War I hero along with the rest of his unit. He often made claims of braving machine gun fire and boasted of having survived a massive gas attack. Perhaps surprisingly, Hitler's claims of his wartime heroism were widely repeated not only throughout his reign of terror, but for decades afterward, simply because he had been an ordinary soldier, and it was difficult to dig up files about him. That's according to Dr. Thomas Weber, a historian at the University of Aberdeen. He told The Guardian that when he started taking a deeper look into Hitler's wartime service, he found that while Hitler had been a runner, as he claimed, he wasn't on the front lines. He'd actually been stationed at headquarters, where conditions were pretty chill. And as for that gas attack, historians, including Weber, say that it's likely a lie as well. Their evidence includes a doctor's note that cites Hitler as being diagnosed with hysterical blindness, not complications from gas exposure. And he apparently wasn't as popular with his own regiment as he liked to portray. Records that include diaries and letters refer to him as a rear area pig. In other documents, his fellow soldiers joked that he'd starve in a canned food factory because he was incapable of opening a can, and laughed at his submissiveness to superior officers. According to Hitler, he had a brush with death on September 28, 1918. This supposedly happened when he, injured and unarmed, found himself looking down the barrel of a British gun. He was released, though, and later identified the much-decorated Private Henry Tandy as the soldier who let him go. He even picked Tandy's image out of a painting later on. While it's true that Tandy himself told sources at the time that he had taken aim at a wounded man but couldn't bring himself to do it, no one has ever been able to prove that Hitler was the person he spared. There are numerous reasons why his claim was likely bogus. First, the painting in question is one by an Italian artist named Buccinino Matania, and it depicts events that happened in 1914, not 1918. In addition, documentation uncovered in the Bavarian State Archives shows that Hitler was actually on leave from September 25th to September 27th, the day before the alleged incident was said to have taken place. Add in the fact that Hitler's regiment was stationed a full 50 miles away from where Tandy was, and the likelihood of the story being true is slim to none. Tandy's biographer, Dr. David Johnson, explained to the BBC, "With his godlike self-perception, the story added to his own myth, that he had been spared for something greater, that he was somehow chosen." His story embellished his reputation nicely. On June 1st, 1939, the New York Times reported that Germany had signed a non-aggression pact with Denmark. It was suggested that the agreement was, quote, another proof of Germany's policy of peaceful relations with neighbor states, as well as earnest both of Germany's peaceful aims and of Denmark's neutrality policy. This may very well have been true, had it not been another of Hitler's lies. The treaty with Denmark fell in line with the declared neutrality of Norway, Sweden, and Finland, but ultimately that was part of the problem. The Norwegian city of Narvik was a crucial part of the ore trade and too important for Hitler to risk losing. Occupying Denmark's military bases would provide an invaluable jumping-off point that would be needed if Germany was going to move into Scandinavia. And by the end of 1939, invasion was pretty much a foregone conclusion, in spite of a September speech in which Hitler declared, "The neutral states have assured us of their neutrality, just as we had already guaranteed it to them." Only not so much. Hitler put his stamp of approval on Operation Visierung on February 29th of the following year, and Denmark surrendered after just a few hours of fighting on April 9th, 1940. It wouldn't be liberated from German occupation until May 1945. On September 1st, 1939, Adolf Hitler stood in front of the Reichstag and gave a speech. In it, he repeated some of the now familiar rhetoric about how the Treaty of Versailles was unfair to Germany, and he also declared that in the face of inevitable conflict. He said, "I have already made known in the Reichstag, I will not war against women and children. I have ordered my Air Force to restrict itself to military objectives." How false was that? Very, starting with the invasion of Poland on that very day. The National World War II Museum cites another speech, this one given to his military leaders on August 22, 1939. There, he made his true objective clear. Polish men, women, and children were to be killed, quote, "with the greatest brutality and without mercy." Death squads were formed, and like the name suggests, they were meant only for killing, particularly the men and women who made it onto the lists of people the Nazis deemed most dangerous, along with all Jewish people.
This sort of feeling developed that we were helpless.
And as for limiting the Air Force to military objectives, there's no better example of how that went than the Blitz carried out against Britain in 1940. The Coventry City Council counted around 43,000 homes that had been destroyed or damaged, with witnesses sharing stories of children trying to dig their way to safety through solid brick walls and rivers of boiling butter running from destroyed dairies. The 11-hour raid was said to be retribution for attacks on Munich. It was Hitler's invasion of Poland that finally and famously dragged much of the rest of the world into war, and bizarrely, that invasion was all built on a carefully constructed lie. It started with the realization that the German army needed at least some sort of justification for turning on Poland, which led to Hitler's orders that a series of false flag operations be staged by the SS. Although there were numerous incidents, a headline-making one would be the Gleiwitz incident. On August 31st, 1939, a group of SS soldiers, dressed as Poles, took over the radio station in the German border town of Gleiwitz. Then they made an announcement that it was under Polish control. Staging the operation as a short-lived attack and rebellion, they shot and killed a German farmer who had reportedly had Polish sympathies and left his body at the station as proof of the vicious attack and the station's recovery by German soldiers. Joseph Goebbels took over from there. It wasn't long before news of the attack was being broadcast across Europe. Even the BBC picked up on the story via the German news agency, reporting that Polish insurgents had taken the station briefly before getting into a firefight with German soldiers. The following morning, German troops were on their way into Poland for retribution, for an attack that Hitler had his SS fake. In January 1939, Hitler gave a speech that included this accusation against the entirety of Germany's Jewish population. He said, "What they possess today, they have by a very large extent gained at the cost of the less astute German nation by the most reprehensible manipulations." He's talking about what's widely referred to as the stab-in-the-back myth, which essentially claims that Germany's World War I defeat was in large part due to espionage, sabotage, and other evil machinations that have taken place largely on the home front. Other groups that would later be villainized by the Nazi Party, including Social Democrats and left-leaning liberals, would also be blamed, but Jewish people bore the brunt of the hate. Many of the party's most adamant supporters tripped over themselves in their hurry to buy into the entire idea, as it was an incredibly convenient way to shift blame for Germany's defeat on an already marginalized group and away from the German elite who didn't want to be called out for their failings. Hitler wasn't the one to invent the stab-in-the-back myth, but he was perhaps the biggest and most dangerous champion of it. And yes, it was a myth that grew some serious legs, in part because it had the support of people like World War I General Erich Ludendorff, who threw his support behind Hitler early on. In a weird footnote, Hitler would later back away from associating with Ludendorff because he was a little too strange for Hitler. Hitler's most famous rhetoric involves the Aryan race and contamination by the so-called lesser races. In Mein Kampf, he wrote, For a racially pure people which is conscious of its blood can never be enslaved by the Jew. In this world, he will forever be master over bastards and bastards alone. And so he tries systematically to lower the racial level by a continuous poisoning of individuals. Hitler definitely isn't the first to jump on the scientific racism bandwagon, and he wasn't the last. That being said, it's extremely important to stress that there's no basis for any of this in reality, at all. Still, Hitler's racist and anti-Semitic beliefs laid the groundwork for the Nazis' ideas and governmental policy, which of course led to mass killings, concentration camps, and the deaths of millions of people. It also led to the establishment of a shocking 44,000 holding sites for those deemed undesirable. On the flip side of that, there was the Lebensborn program, which was designed to encourage breeding between those deemed genetically suitable for creating the Nazis' ideal Nordic race. While the roots of scientific racism go back much further than Hitler, it's an idea that's managed to hold on throughout the decades. Science has disproved the ideas of scientific racism over and over again, even finding that on a genetic level there is no such thing as race. In a nutshell, it's teeny tiny tweaks in DNA that manifest in outward physical traits, and at the end of the day, a human is precisely that, human.